Transfiguration, and then them coming down from the mountain and asking the questions about Elijah, which we covered last week. And then we come to a interesting situation. And I want to look at this from Peter's perspective for just a moment. What was Peter's response to the transfiguration? Y'all remember?
Peter's response about building an altar.
Yeah, he wanted to build let's build 3 altars. If you build the altars, what does that mean? You're going to worship all 3.
Yeah. You putting all 3 kind on the same level.
Doing that, what does that mean for you from a physical perspective, as far as if you got altars, you worship at the altar, right? So that means you probably ain't going to what? Come down off the mountain?
Okay, I see that.
Because prior to going up in the mountain, the life of the disciple walking with Jesus, was it easy? No. There were threats, issues, and problems. So, from that perspective, what they're about to walk into is probably somewhat disturbing. It's probably what Peter wanted to avoid. If you look back in verse 5, look at what it says. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. It's good to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Because he did not know what to say, for they were greatly afraid. He didn't know what to say, but he knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to be where? There. All right. So, when they come down, verse 14 says, and when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed and running to him, greeted him. And he asked the scribes, what are you discussing with them? So the scribes have his disciples, all right? Everybody but Peter, James, and John. So they got the rest of the group. They got the other 9. And there's a dispute going on. And look at the dispute. Then one of the crowd answered and said, Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit. Notice what he said. Who did he bring him to? Jesus. He said, I brought him to you. All right? And wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. Okay, so he says he brought him a what kind of spirit? Mute. What does that mean? Can't talk. I bought you my son because, now the assumption here is that his son could talk at one point. Now he can't talk. And then he says that this mute spirit seizes him, throws him down, and foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. What would we call that today? A seizure. That's what we call that today. We would say, it's just a seizure. Okay. This becomes controversial for today because, people would see that and say, oh, he just had a seizure. If he was just having a seizure, then what would Jesus have done if he was just having seizures? Healed him. He would have healed him from the seizures. But the man says, it's the spirit. All right. And they go on, and then the man goes on to say, so I spoke to your disciples. I couldn't get you. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it means they tried. What's the problem? By the way, when they came back, what did they tell Jesus when he had sent them out? When they came back? We did what? We cast out demons. Yeah. So, what's the problem? He gave them the authority. Anybody ever been given authority on your job? Right? Do you have authority to do things? Do you do them? Got a yes or no? Yeah, you do. Okay, if you have the authority to do something on your job, why do you do it? Keep the job going. Usually it's to make the job a little bit easier for you. Anybody ever manage people? Right? So you've been given authority over them? Right? And so when you've been given authority over someone, when you ask them to do something, when you ask them to do something, what do you expect? Why? Because you asked. Because you've been given that authority, right? I mean, then your boss do you that way?
Yes.
Your boss will be shocked if you went, no, I ain't doing it. Right? You know what you're speaking with? A whole lot of faith. Especially when you're managing people. There's things you can do. Somebody says, no, I ain't doing it. Fire 'em. But ultimately, when you ask or tell or whatever it is you do, using that authority, you expect what you're saying to take place because you have the authority. So you're actually speaking in faith based on the fact that you've been told that you have this much authority. If Jesus has told the disciples that they have authority over unclean spirits, my question is simple. Do they have that authority? Yes. Absolutely. So they should have been able to cast out the demon. This is what Peter did not want to come back to. This is why Peter wanted to stay up there. Because the disciples do have a fundamental problem that all of us have. Verse 19. He answered him and said, O faithless generation. Stop right there. Jesus gave it. What's the problem?
They didn't believe.
Faith. But he gave him the authority. Where does faith come from? What does the Bible say? There's a scripture. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing the word of God. What that means is if God says it, that's it. He doesn't say you have to believe hard. That's what always kills me with faith. I think people think of faith as some kind of a force. You know, kind of like a Marvel character who has power. If you ever watch a movie, any character that has any kind of power, whatever it is, they can make the power intensify, or, you know, if they just, the harder I do it, the more power I have. I think people look at faith that way, and faith does not work that way. You either believe it or you don't. You either are sure or you have doubts. In fact, if you have doubts, is that faith? No. No. When y'all walk out of here and you get in your car, you will, with a great deal of faith, turn a key or push a button in full expectation that that car is going to start. You don't get there and sit in there and, oh, I believe. The only time you start acting with doubt is when you know you got a bad battery, or the last time you cranked up it just didn't seem like it wanted to. You ever cranked up, but right before you cranked up, you got that ticking sound? You get that ticking sound, the next time you crank, now you worry. You start lacking faith, you're getting in there, you might be praying, Lord, please let this car start. That's because your faith is gone. He answered and said to them, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? Look at that question. How in the world do you not have faith and I'm standing here with you? I gave you authority. Now, here's the thing. Did he give them authority in some written way? Or did he physically, verbally stand before them and give them authority? Stood before them. Physically gave them authority. Now, here's the other part. When they left 2 by 2, were they casting out demons? They came back excited about it. Oh, yeah, we did it. Well, what happened between that and here? Lost their faith. Faith is a difficult thing. What in the world could cause people to lose their faith? Satan. So how does Satan do that?
Bringing you trials. This world is making you give up.
How about this one? In this case, I'm going to give you a different kind of demon to fool with. You know, in Ephesians, we find out that there are principalities and powers and rulers of darkness, which means there's a hierarchy amongst demons. So what I'll do, I'll give you a demon that is a bit resistant. I'm going to show you in a minute. That had nothing to do with it. This is and this is just Kevin, but this is the part that if you'll notice, every other time that we've seen demons cast out, the demon would speak. I'm legion, you know, what do we have to do with you, right? This one is mute. I kind of wonder what the disciples did to cast this demon out. What did they do? The demon didn't speak. I'm just wondering, what was it that caused them in this situation to suddenly, is it because the boy was having seizures-like activity? If he started clenching his teeth and fell on the ground and foaming at the mouth and was rigid, are they sitting there going, well, I don't know what to do with this one? Because the way this has been happening, you know, this is how faith, this is one of the, to me, I call it one of the main tricks that Satan uses on us. Let me just change your situation. Oh, you had faith then, but things went a certain way. So your expectation is that every time you run into something, it's going to go this way. Let me throw this wrinkle in there. And then when the wrinkle comes in, doubt shows up. Doubt shows up. All of a sudden, I'm doubting. So that's why Jesus says, how long shall I bear with you? What does that mean? Bear.
Put up with.
Put up. How long? What? I mean, what? Think about it. He's saying, what in the world am I supposed to be doing here? If I'm with you and I tell you you got authority, and you go out and exercise it, and then as soon as things get different, a little dicier, you done lost your faith. Why do I put up with that? Then he says, bring him to me. Jesus is not saying to them, you had to bring him to me. But why is Jesus saying, bring him to me? What is the purpose?
He can show the disciples that you can do this.
He's got to show the disciples, first of all, let me show you my authority, and then I gave you that authority. Now I want you to watch what happened in verse 20. Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, notice he is lowercase and him is uppercase. So he, being the one who's possessed, saw Jesus. Immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. Okay, ain't that the same thing that's been happening? So then Jesus looks over at the Father, verse 21, it says, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. Again, a lot of us would look at that and say, oh, the boy just got epilepsy. But the key here is that when they brought him to Jesus, this is what happened. And evidently, when they brought him to the disciples, the same thing happened. So it's not that the demon didn't recognize who they were. The problem had to do with their own faith. So then in verse 22 says, and often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Now, notice what the Father says. The Father says, but if you can do anything. What's the Father's faith here? I brought you to, right? I brought him to Jesus. And then when he gets there, he says, if you can do anything. Is that a very faithful statement? That's doubtful. That's doubtful. It's been going on since childhood. Nobody's done anything. Oh, wait a minute. The scribes were there, and they were arguing with the disciples, probably criticizing them, saying, oh, you can't cast out this demon? I thought Jesus had all this power. I thought y'all were his disciples. I thought he was supposed to, wait a minute. Scribes, aren't you supposed to be able to do something about this too? Where's their faith? I want you to consider when Jesus says, oh, faithless generation. This been happening since this boy was a child. Nobody, no religious leaders, none of the scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, none of these individuals could do anything for this boy. When Jesus says, oh, faithless generation, I think he's including everybody there. Because the fact of the matter is, if they are Jews, they know who God is. If they know who God is, they know God has power over unclean spirits. That should be a given. So now you've got the Father coming to Jesus out of desperation, saying, if you can do anything. Then verse 23, Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Okay. If you can believe. That statement right there is a statement that I think God would want us to consider about our faith. Because it's an if-then statement. If you can believe, then, the then part is, all things are possible to him who believes. What does that tell you about the lives we live? Let me give you an example. What does the Bible tell us about our finances? Because that's the one that's where we all lose our minds.
To be a good steward.
To be a good steward. Back on that one. Yeah. To pay your taxes, all of that good stuff. How about this? What does it say about the provision of resources? God provides, right? Okay. And if I have faith, and I believe that God provides, he gives me some instruction about that. Because if I have faith, then what he says is, whatever I have given you is what? Enough. But what if he gave me more than he gave you? Is what he gave you enough? Yes. Absolutely. So, people don't think of this in terms of faith, but this is a faith issue. What do we do when we find out others have more than we have?
We think they have more, we have less.
Some will go that route. That's one route is, well, they must have more faith than me. I'm not getting enough. Therefore, I don't have faith that God actually gave me enough. Why did they get more? and says, with what you have, be what? Content. Be content. God says, I will give you the resource you need. Yeah, but I drive a Kia. And when I go to work, I counted one day. I counted 11 Teslas. I did. I just started seeing, I'm like, that's the fourth one, the fifth, the sixth. And I just started counting 11 Teslas. I did it for fun, literally, because I'm over the Tesla thing. But imagine if I would have said, well, Lord, how is it all these other people get this car that I had wanted? Am I acting in faith? No. So, if I just believe that, watch this, Jesus has provided me with everything I needed, look at the next part. All things are possible to him who believes. Everything else is possible for me when it comes to that area. If I will first believe that he's given me what I'm supposed to have. Because if I believe that, then I got to believe the second part, which is everything's going to be possible to me, which means I also believe what he told me about what he gave me, which is I'm supposed to be a good steward. What does it mean to be a good steward, Bob?
Good manager or using wisdom, skill of what God has given you.
Okay, absolutely. And here's the big thing about that. Steward, as he said, manager, means it ain't mine. Anybody have to deal with having a budget at work? How do you act with that budget? Tight. Tight. Do you ever run out with that budget and overextend yourself? No. You know what you say? Ain't my money. It ain't my money. I'm not. When I traveled a lot, you know, we got per diem, right? And it would give me so much money a day. And so I would pick where I was going to eat based on my per diem. And wasn't gonna get in trouble for it, because you know what? It wasn't my money. But see, when I go to work and I get a paycheck and I say that's my money and it ain't God's, so now it ain't about being a steward. It's my money, and it ain't doing what I wanted to do. And since it ain't doing what I wanted to do, I'm going to overextend myself to get to where I want to be, because I missed the first part of that. If I believe that God gave me enough, I'd have the second part down. All things will be possible to me. Does that mean everything? No, it means all things that are right are possible. What are my resources supposed to do for me? Take care of needs. What do I need? I need to eat. I need to get out the weather. I need to put something on my body. Do I need anything beyond that? No. Do I need designer clothes? I don't. Do I need to outdress anybody? Mm-mm. Do I need to eat gourmet food? all of that stuff is just, you know, if you're able to, well, be content with that too. But if you're not, that's our problem. Because he says here, if you can believe, if you can just believe, if you believe that God is your provider, and that's why I'm using that as an example, because that's the one that's easiest for us to understand. If you believe that, then you have to also believe that you're supposed to be a good steward, which means it ain't your money. And if it ain't your money, the way you act with it is an act of faith. See, when we don't, that's what's going on here. They can't cast out the demon because they have a lack of faith. It's no different. Faith faith works the same everywhere. We can't do with our finances because of a lack of faith. It's not because we're stupid. It's because we don't believe what God says. If we don't believe what God says, how am I supposed to do what I'm supposed to do with it? So when I get into trouble financially, it's actually a lack of faith. And people would look at it and be like, no, see, I need more. No, it's not that you needed more. You were supposed to do with what you had, like he said do. Yes, ma'am.
I was just listening and I was like, well, wouldn't that be the opposite of walking in fear? I mean, like, wouldn't that be the opposite of faith, walking in fear?
Yeah.
Like, you were saying that the demons, that there was a different kind of demon, a different kind of experience that they had, and it's like, I haven't seen this before, so now I'm scared.
Now I'm scared. And that's what Satan does. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but when that fear comes up, what happens to your faith?
It disappears.
Right? And your faith is here. I like to tell people, it's here. It's a simple, I believe it. It's here. Fear is the mind killer. Y'all do that. How many of y'all, when you're afraid, can think?
Can't.
It's difficult.
Yes. It's difficult to think when you are afraid. When you're afraid, you have a fight or flight mentality. Either I need to fight it or I need to get away from it. And by the way, the fight part, it ain't, when you're afraid, you don't attack. It's when your back is against the wall, when you can't run. That's why I don't like the fact that they say fight or flight. It should be flight or fight. Because flight is first. If I can get away, I'm afraid. God says, I have to give you a spirit of fear. God says you need to be walking in faith. And so with that in mind, if you can believe all things are possible to him that believes. I missed the clock. Okay, so verse 24. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Notice what he said. Help my unbelief. That's a perfect prayer.
Yes.
Help my unbelief. Because if I get my unbelief correct, then what am I going to end up doing? I'm going to end up believing, and then all things are possible for me. When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more. Verse 26, then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him, and he became as one dead, so that many said he is dead, but Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And we had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? That's what we're going to start on next week, because Jesus is going to explain something to them that when you first see it, you're going to think, oh, that's what I got to do. That's not what he's saying. So read forward, and when we come back next week, we're going to dive deep into the concept of what Jesus is saying about this faith. All right? Let's stop there. I'm sorry for ran over 5 minutes. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for once again giving us this opportunity to look into your word, helping us to understand faith, helping us to understand, Father, that if we just would believe, all things will be possible. But we've got to believe. And believing is simply doing what your word says. Believing it and doing it. So help us with that. Increase our faith. We give you thanks in the name of Jesus. Amen.
So that means I got to start counting Corvettes.
Corvette?